What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Real Podcast. Today we have another special guest. His name is Quinton. I'm sorry, guys, I'm drinking coffee, so that's why I'm a bit, Yeah. So, as usual, guys, I'm just going to let my guest introduce himself, his full name and who he is and what he does and all of that, and then we'll take it from there. Hi, Quinton. Thank you so much, man, for coming through today. We truly appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So, if you can just tell us more about yourself and
Okay, so my name's Quinton Fredericks.
yeah.
I work as a producer for Spear Films, which has been in existence for a number of years. We've done multiple projects,
Spear Forms with Michael, right?
with Michael Rett, who's our MD and based in London.
Okay.
And I have been in the industry for about 20 years. I used to have my own production company, Pitch Black Films. Won a SAFTA in 2007.
I know Pitch Black Films. So, did you own that company?
Yeah, that was my company.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I know Pitch Black.
Yeah, so we did a series called What's Your Story way back in the day in 2007, 58-part, 24-minute series.
Oh, wow.
That we won a SAFTA for. And we done a number of standalone feature-length documentaries, largely for the SABC, on culture, heritage, and identity, which is really my passion. But also, I set up the SA Film Academy in 2006, which is still in existence today.
So, sorry, Quinton. Okay. Is like the Film Academy did you set it up yourself?
Well, I set it up in partnership with companies like Film Africa and Moonlighting and Two Oceans.
So weird. Okay. What's his name again? Because Quinton from Mnet, the commissioning editor of Mnet.
Yeah.
Introduced me to SA Film Academy.
Yeah.
At some point, I think it was Seton or something. I'm not sure. I don't remember the name.
Seton Bailey.
Yeah, the names. Right. Yeah. Is he working with you guys?
Yeah, Seton came on board after I had raised the initial funding from the then MapSeater, for 30 learners, which was our initial cohort into the film industry to actually drive the development of a new generation of black HODs in the industry, which is we'll talk about a bit later.
Yeah.
But I'm also working on multiple projects in development, including a feature-length documentary that's funded in partnership with the NEVF and the Dutch Film Fund, and that's dealing with violence and the murders of LGBTQI community members. Then we've got a series that we're developing with a partner in the Eastern Cape, comedic series called Queendom, which is really funny. So that's got expressions of interest from SABC, DTIC, Rebate Office.
Yeah.
And then, a number of other projects in development, including the story on Brenda Fassie, which we're doing in partnership with Netflix.
That's Spear Films, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember that was like 2 or 3 years ago. Spear Films have been working on this project for quite a lot. I mean, on development for some time. Because I remember that it was like before, like 3 or 4 years ago, when I spoke with Michael about another project of mine that I wanted to do. He told me that they were preparing to do Brenda Fassie, and then they were gonna look into my project after Brenda Fassie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, COVID obviously impacted us as a company. There was issues with the DTIC film and TV rebate incentive scheme that withheld pre-approved payments of 650 million last year, which had a devastating impact on our sector.
Yeah.
And really was unprecedented in terms of the consequence of that particular process, which I'm glad to say we've resolved largely.
Yeah.
With most of the member companies of the Independent Producers Organization, which I co-chair, having been cleared of any wrongdoing in terms of compliance with the BEE legislation.
So you also co-chair IPO.
Yeah, so I've been co-chair of the IPO for the last 2 years, and in that capacity, I am also representing the IPO in the Transformation Forum.
Okay, so guys, for those who don't know, what is IPO is the Independent Producers Organization.
Yeah, so the IPO has been around for about 20 years, and we represent about 80% of independent producers in the industry in the country. And in that capacity, I also sit on the board of the South African Screen Federation, which has all the different guilds like the Writers Guild, the South Actors Guild,
Yes.
Performance Management Agency as constituent members of that body.
Yes.
And in that respect, I deal a lot with the policy development and legislation around different pieces of policy that are meant to support the industry, including the development of the Creative Industries Master Plan. So I guess it's safe to say that, I wear a number of different hats in that role as co-chair of the IPO.
Sure.
And one of the key things that we've really been looking at is this development of a triple BE scorecard against which transformation and change will be measured for the industry. And that process has been underway for almost 10 years. And I've been on that task team since, I think it's June 2021. And we're now in the final stages of actually the third round of public consultation around that scorecard.
So if you can just maybe explain what this scorecard is all about. So for people who don't have an idea what you are talking about.
Yeah. So as you'll know, broad-based Black economic empowerment is a key pillar of transformation policy for the South African democratic state.
Yes.
And that's really the intention and the objective is to address the redress of the past, where Black people were excluded from participation in any economic activity by law for more than 50 years, and preceding that under successive colonial administrations. And essentially, the document is consistent with similar charters and scorecards that have been developed in other industries. For example, the tourism sector, the mining sector, the banking sector. And I have to admit that our sector has been lagging behind in the development of a scorecard against which transformation targets can be measured and evaluated. And essentially, it serves as a blueprint for how companies then engage with the transformation agenda under the different elements of the scorecard. For example, you have ownership as one element, which is a key element. Then you have management representation of Black people at the senior executive level, at mid-management. And then you have another component under skills development, which is measures the extent to which companies are investing in the skills development of Black people in their businesses. Then you have enterprise development, which is the element that looks at how established businesses are supporting existing and smaller owned enterprises, mostly Black owned enterprises. And then you have social economic investment, which is really the social responsibility element of the scorecard, where you look at how a percentage of profits is used to drive community development in areas where there's significant underdevelopment and a legacy of apartheid. So in a nutshell, that's the context within which the scorecard exists. At the same time, it gives government a clear indication as to whether certain targets are being reached and whether companies are compliant with those targets that have been set. So as I said earlier, we now in the third and final round of public consultation on the scorecard with people in the industry being invited to comment on the draft targets and weightings that the Transformation Task Team has put forward in the development of this document. And it's really critical because transformation, if you look at the 2021 NFVF report on transformation, it shows clearly that there's and this is a consistent pattern across all sectors of the economy, that there's a lack of representation of black people, particularly at senior management level in companies operating in our sector. And it's safe to say that that's a microcosm of our economy generally, where senior black management representation is really a major issue, including the question of black female representation at that level of operation in businesses. And that's an issue that's come up time and time again in different forums. It's a consistent feature. We, in the Western Cape, we now have a situation, for example, where the provincial government and the DA, as a political party, has rejected triple BEE as a policy of redress, which means that there's now contestation between how in the Western Cape region, where the bulk of the international service work actually comes from studios, is actually going to be addressed with regards to the transformation targets that we know need to be implemented as a matter of urgency. And that's one of the major causes of concern. And if you listen to the president on the radio this morning, citing the responses to his State of the Nation address, he clearly stated that the level of political contestation around key policy imperatives is significant in South Africa. And even though it's very healthy for our democracy to have that level of robust interaction and exchange, there are certain considerations that are cause for concern, including the very real fact that there's a growing understanding that resistance to transformation is becoming entrenched for a number of reasons.
Is it just according to you? Is it just a Western Cape issue, or is it just a national?
No, it's not just a Western Cape issue. As I said earlier on, you can take the film and television industry now. In Joburg, for example, you have the center of the television industry. You have ETV, SABC, MultiChoice, all located up in Joburg. So with the operations of those broadcasters, we've seen the growth of black-owned production houses and suppliers over the last 15 or 20 years grow incrementally, but then again being impacted by the period that Hlaudi Motsoeneng was in office, where the SABC as a national broadcaster with a key role to play in both educating and informing our nation, but also driving.
How do you think Hlaudi did when he was heading SABC?
Well, I have to admit,
because some other people said that he was a people's person. Some others said that he was making like ridiculous decisions. Some others say that he was making good decisions, that benefits, especially black people or so whatever,
Look, I've not done business with the SABC since the financial implosion in 2008, when they wiped out a number of black-owned production houses, and so including ours.
Who's that? SABC?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, there was a massive deficit in 2007, 2008. Where the SABC stopped commissioning projects from the different provinces, and a number of smaller, particularly black-owned production companies like ourselves that had just started up at the time, were obviously impacted by that. And what it meant is that we had to close our offices and retrench all our staff. And then, my partner and I had to move to Joburg from 2010 to 2020 to work as freelancers because the work was just not being commissioned in the provinces. And I don't think the SABC ever really recovered from that particular crisis.
Yeah.
I, 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 I'm loath to comment on Schlaudi's tenure at the SABC because I think, the question of public opinion is always informed by what narrative is out there. But having said that, and having watched what was happening over that period at the SABC and the questions around, the role of the board, the appointment of senior executives and the manner in which those processes were undertaken under that particular administration, one can conclude that there were grounds for serious concern in terms of how the SABC as a national broadcaster was being administered during that period.
Sure.
Now, I think it's a collective responsibility, and that was clear in terms of some of the inquiries that were made by the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Communications, where board members were invited to come and give input as to what exactly was transpiring at the SABC.
Sure.
And I followed that quite closely and keenly. And I have to admit, some of the stuff that came out during that parliamentary inquiry process was really disturbing, and which made me, as a filmmaker and as a producer director, concerned for the future viability of the national broadcaster in no uncertain terms, because we rely on the national broadcaster not just to keep the broad majority of our people informed and updated on key events, but also, provide entertainment and other properties to the citizenry. That period, I think, was certainly something that we're going to, again, if you look at what's happening at the SABC at the moment, going to take a long time to actually recover from. But I think, you can't lay the blame for all of that at one person's door.
Yeah.
There's actually a whole administration and machine behind that, including the Communications Ministry, which had oversight over the SABC. So, it's a contested arena for different people and different agendas, and it will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. And it really does require a urgent attention to deal with those challenges, given the critical role that the national broadcaster plays.
That's ish. So I hear you saying that that you when all that happened with the SABC, you went to Joburg. Why the decision going to Joburg? Like,
well, you see, when the SABC had something called the Content Hub, they had a very specific mandate, and they were commissioning very specific programming from the different provinces in terms of representation, heritage, identity, culture, history. And it was really an incredible time at the SABC.
Sure.
It was so full of opportunity and excitement at the fact that for the first time in the history of the national broadcaster, which had largely served as a mouthpiece for the National Party under apartheid, there was going to be a real change. Our people's stories were going to be told. We were going to have robust, informed debate. We were going to have high-end content being produced. that would educate and entertain and inform the nation. And so when that financial implosion happened in 2008, we were on the cusp of building a whole new generation of independent production houses. And when that implosion happened and the financial crisis plunged the SABC into debt, all those dreams just disappeared.
Yeah.
And so the work literally that was being commissioned from the provinces, including the Western Cape where we lived at the time, just literally dried up. And so we had no choice, but in order to pursue a livelihood, we had to go to Joburg where there was still work being commissioned,
Yeah.
in Gauteng. And that's where we spent the years between 2010 and 2020, living in Joburg, just working as freelancers, which, after having run your own business is a real adaptation. And also, working on projects for the sake of earning a living, as opposed to actually developing the projects that you want to develop.
Yeah.
And that are important to the national discourse.
Yes.
So it was a very debilitating time, and I think other independent producers and creatives can attest to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. So what what's your take in terms of like transformation when it comes to filmmakers, like specifically black filmmakers in Cape Town? Because this is what as we spoke about as well with David Max Brown when he was here. You find like young black filmmakers running to Joburg because all they know in Cape Town is just to be assistants, or is just to help someone, or is just to help another white, maybe mentor another white person when they're coming in, and then they overtake them and be their HODs, So this is everywhere, but obviously no one wants to talk about it because everyone is just looking after their stomachs.
Yeah.
If they talk about it, there won't be any work for them. They will get, blindsided, or they will get, So that's the issue. That's why no one is talking about it, So, when I get people like you, or, wanting to talk about these things, I get excited because these are the things that, just makes my blood boil. Because you have the entire industry talking about these things, but no one is actually talking about it.
Yeah, so, that's a morbid reality in our industry, particularly here in the Western Cape. And it's been a recurring theme in the narrative of black filmmakers, creatives, producers, that the industry has been hostile to transformation in no uncertain terms. And I can attest to that, having chaired the working group on BEE and transformation in 2006 under the Cape Film Commission, where the resistance to the development of a BEE charter for our industry was significant from established vested interests in the sector. And, that process just collapsed with the demise of the Cape Film Commission. And so it's left a vacuum here in the Western Cape.
What is the, when it comes to playing a role in the industry, in the transformation of the industry, what is the role of Cape Town Film Commission? Or they just here just to attract.
Okay, so let me just clarify. The Cape Town Film Commission no longer exists. Okay, it collapsed a number of years ago, and the responsibility for attracting investment to the Western Cape was devolved to Westgrow, which is the trade and investment promotion industry for the Western Cape.
Westgrow.
Yeah, so that's an initiative that's set up under the Western Cape government, and it's funded partly by the Western Cape government and the city of Cape Town. And their focus is on investment promotion. It's not on development.
Yeah.
Now, if you compare, for example, the fact that Gauteng has a film commission, KZN has a film commission, and if you look at the programs that they've got in place to support emerging and black-owned creatives and producers and production houses, then the Western Cape is lagging far behind in terms of those processes.
Yeah, exactly, it is.
And that's a huge problem. And I was in a meeting as recently as yesterday where, again, we raised this issue of the fact that black crew are not being advanced, and there's no structured career development program to advance black crew, particularly in the services industry in the Western Cape. Even though there are these training initiatives that have been in existence for many, many years, you find that there's no coordinated approach to making sure that you advance a generation of black crew. Because remember that on a production, for example, if you have a production manager or a line producer working on the particular production, they have their preferred suppliers that they always work with.
Yes.
Now, if you're consistently farming out the work to those suppliers, how do you drive enterprise development, and how do you remove the barriers of entry for new emerging and even existing black-owned businesses that are struggling to grow their market share? Now, that's what I was saying about the film industry being a microcosm of the broader South African economy, and where in the Western Cape, for example, we know that that resistance has been real.
Yeah.
It's tangible. We know the frustration of black filmmakers and crew in the Western Cape. We also know that people who have families to support and are afraid to speak out and to highlight, for example, income inequality in terms of pay parity between black and white crew, which is an issue that's come to our attention as the IPO on a number of occasions, are not prepared to actually stand up and be counted simply because they feel that they're going to be victimized.
Yeah.
Now, that's a big issue.
It's a huge issue.
It's a big issue.
I mean, that's, what are you saying? That's the main reason we opened up IDA, Independent Directors Association, where we represent directors and DOPs, advocating for their rights, advocating, not like directors and DOPs in general, but more specifically black people, black directors and DOPs. You know what I mean? Because I remember when they were looking for a director. I remember when we got an email. They were looking for a director to do an EP for Blood and Water Season 2. They said that they're looking for a specifically black director. Specifically black director. And then for me, I was kind of shocked, that they would, because I would get briefs, like I would lose briefs easily. For some of the briefs that I would lose, for obvious reasons, because some of the other briefs that I've lost, it's simply because of, since I've started talking about the transformation in the industry, So when some of these agencies go to and do a reference to some other producers and some other people, and then they will talk bad about me, simply because Andile is the guy that is all about this black transformation and all. You know what I mean? So that's when I realized that I'm doing something good. I'm doing something right. So let us open this, IDA, Independent Directors Association Africa, which we advocate for. I sent an email to the minister. To the director of Department of Arts and Culture, and they referred me to the CEO of National Video Foundation about the situation that is happening in Cape Town, because it's brutal. It's no longer a joke. It's no longer I grew up in this thing. I've been in this industry for almost two decades. Started off as a PA from school, because I wanted to be an actor. Did drama from drama school. I went to film industry, and then PA. I worked myself up into full-time directing.
We were talking about your challenges and being marginalized in the briefing process
Yes.
for particular projects.
So I said this because it's brutal. I realized this. I was doing something right when I started talking. Because I starting from this industry, I grew up in this industry. I saw what was happening. I could see what was happening. People that were in the industry. When I joined the industry, someone would be like, "I've been here for 10 years," and they still assisting, they still focus puller, they still a gaffer, part-time best boy, maybe a gaffer on that small PEP job, 1 day PEP job or something like that, when they're looking for someone who won't charge the money, and then they think, oh, there's that guy, there's Andile, Andile is I'm sure he wants to be a gaffer. Let's just get him. And then when they've got big budgets, and then they go into their, I saw all this thing happening in the industry, and it hurt me. Some of my brothers and sisters, some of them would say, I've given, some of them will be out of school wanting to direct, and they'll be, they will be thrown into training, which is understandable. They'll be training in a movie, and then you find that this person was a trainee on a movie, the whole entire movie, did 4 years or 5 years or whatever in school doing directing, and then doing trainee on this movie. On the next one, they're using him as a PA, and then you ask yourself, when is this person growing? You know what I mean? And then you see some other people of color. Last year they were PA, and then the next season they production managing or they producing for you. I'm like, what the heck? You know what I mean? So I saw all those things, and that's when I started talking. So specifically, most of our brothers and sisters going to Joburg. I'm sure working Joburg is limited now, because most of our brothers and sisters are going to Joburg. Every black and a black lady and a black man wants to be a director, wants to be a full-time director, wants to be a full-time DOP, wants to be a full-time producer. They go to Joburg because they stand better chances in Joburg of being those producers and directors than they are in Cape Town, right?
Yeah.
So I saw all that happening, and then I was approached by this company. I'm not going to mention the name. They wanted me to be their partner, but then obviously things didn't go. Things didn't go their way, because it was actually not one company, multiple companies, because they just wanted to use me for the benefits of black whatever, So I saw this because when you're a black director, when they're using a black director for some other applications, the PE, whatever, there's a partner in our company, it's a black PE, the company is whatever PE, so they get more benefits, black economic, whatever benefits. But then obviously that didn't work. And then when I opened my own company, and that's when I saw that the real problem with the people that are trusted in the industry. And then I realized I'm doing something right. So that has been the problem. So when I meet people like you and some other people, then I feel like I'm not alone.
Yeah, you're not alone, but we are few and far between, for all the reasons you've mentioned. And you used a very particular term. You said it's brutal.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I totally agree with that sentiment. It is completely brutal and hostile. And it is an indication of the extent to which the apartheid ideology of exclusion has been internalized in the mindset of those white senior managers and crew members and businesses who consistently oppose transformation and find every reason in the book to circumvent the requirements around meeting some of the targets of transformation in terms of black representation.
Yeah. And
that is an undeniable reality, particularly here in the Western Cape.
Sure.
So, we are really on our own here.
Yeah.
We know that national government it relies on foreign direct investment to bring to the fiscus to meet any one of a number of our development needs and priorities. We also know that there is insufficient investment in the National Film and Video Foundation, for example, to support the development of black creatives. We as the IPO have put forward a motivation for increased funding from the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture to the National Film and Video Foundation, precisely for that reason.
Yeah.
We've asked for reporting from ICASA on the commissioning targets of local content production from all the broadcasters who operate under the remit of the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, which has the regulatory oversight role of ensuring that broadcasters and streamers, etc., comply with local content commissioning targets, and that is also consistent with procurement from emerging and existing black-owned businesses. Now,
sorry, Quinton.
Yeah.
Sorry. My problem is that, when I look at this, when I started like doing my research, my background research about, this transformation, about the change, it seems like all these government sectors and have been working on this, this thing of transformation in the Western Cape for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
When does it get to a point where there's victory?
Yeah.
Because it seems like everyone keeps on, it seems like this is an ongoing and never-ending project. And it's just money keeps going, keeps being poured, money keeps being poured, but the project never gets into a point of now we are here.
You see, our government is caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we have a free market economy. And so it's very difficult to police companies who trade under the elements of contractual law and obligation. And so without a specific regulatory framework, for example, that says X amount of business coming in from the international studios or streamers must go to black-owned businesses. X amount of black crew must be represented on all international productions that come here in a senior HOD capacity. And at the same time, any company applying for government assistance or support from taxpayers' money must comply with those targets. Now, for example, there is already international precedent for that. If you look at what countries like Denmark and France have done, where they forced, by virtue of legislation, the establishment of dedicated film funds from the streamers operating in those territories, where a percentage of their net profit after tax has to go towards a dedicated film fund to drive the development of the local industry, right? Secondly, that a beneficiation model for senior cast and crew, even in some instances, is given to ensure that they derive some benefit from the intellectual property commercialization of that particular product that's been developed in that country under the auspices of their regulatory framework. Now, there's no reason why South Africa can't follow suit on that particular model. The reality is that you have businesses operating in the sector who have very deep pockets and have lobbying happening both behind the scenes and in the public space to ensure that their particular position in terms of why transformation cannot be advanced and accelerated at a greater pace is not possible. And that's a spurious argument, because we've heard that argument for the last 27 years
Yes.
as to why it takes forever to train a DOP, You know, so you have black crew working at the level of assistant for 10 years. Now, that makes no sense.
Makes no logical
It
sense.
makes no logical sense because after 10 years, if let's take a comparative example, if you're a lawyer, you do your undergrad degree, you do your honors,
Yes.
and then you do your 2 years as an articled clerk, and after 7 years, you graduate, you know, and then you work as a professional in the industry.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't have to take 10 years.
No, it doesn't have to. It doesn't even have to take like
It
that
doesn't
7
even
years.
have to take 7 years.
No, not at
It
all.
can take less than 5 years.
Exactly.
If you have a structured approach and you have the necessary government agents holding the industry accountable to meeting those targets, and failing which, then ensuring that those businesses have to account for why they are not actually meeting those particular targets.
Yes.
And at the same time, you also need to build a powerful civil society lobby made up of independent professionals in the industry and businesses who can speak to these issues in a coherent manner and actually act as some kind of mitigating force against the entrenchment of these vested interests. So
Yes.
let's take, for example, the fact that a multi-billion rand services industry exists in the Western Cape that services productions that come from the international studios and also from the streamers. There's a small cohort of companies that get the lion's share of that work and have been doing that for the last 20 years.
It's true.
And those companies have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo for any one of a number of reasons which you've already outlined, including the fact that they essentially dominate the market and therefore have a monopoly on that particular workflow that comes into the country and which brings foreign direct investment in the form of taxes and skills levies and other things into the South African government's coffers. Now, you can argue that that is a priority in terms of stabilizing our economy and addressing the apartheid deficit because we're dependent on that foreign direct investment. But you cannot ignore the national developmental imperatives when it comes to advancing black people across all sectors of the economy and growing black business at the expense of an argument that says the market investment coming through the foreign direct investment process is more important than driving a developmental and a growth agenda. And that's a debate that's happening in government, and it's contested politically between the unions, between the South African state, and particularly by business, which says that the private sector is the be-all and end-all of all our issues. And we've seen that that is not the case. We've seen in the private sector the level of fraud and corruption.
Yes.
If you consider, for example, what happened with Steinhoff.
Yes, and
The billions that went down the tube that was invested by the Public Investment Corporation, which will never be recouped.
That was an ode to when I was watching that documentary, Steinhoff.
Yeah, so to come back to your question around transformation and why it's not being advanced in the Western Cape is that it's a very simple approach. Okay? It's being complicated by any one of a number of positions that have been put forward by established vested interests that do not see the urgency for us to address the need for change and transformation of our economy.
Yes.
And for particularly black people to be empowered in that particular process.
Yes.
Now, what that does is it creates a situation of social instability, given the fact that we have such a high unemployment rate. I think the last statistic I saw was like 40%.
Yeah.
And the bulk of that is in the youth category between the ages of 18 and 24, and then between the ages of 20 and 30. And that's where really you have the potential for social instability,
Yeah.
where unemployed youth get drawn into criminal activity, they become demoralized, they develop addictions,
Yeah.
and the cost to maintaining the social fabric of our society as it unravels as a consequence of that resistance to transformation and change becomes enormous, because the burden on the state to then address the legacy of all of those social issues becomes enormous against the backdrop of the fact that we are still dealing with the legacy of apartheid. And what we have is conservative elements that are insisting on entrenching the status quo according to that legacy. And those arguments are being advanced at the most highest levels in government, and on the ground level, at grassroots level, it's been perpetuated on a very practical level, where black people are simply being excluded from advancement in the value chain and in the businesses of these operations.
Sure. Great. This is very, very informative and conversation that we're having. Very, very, very informative. I'm glad that you are here today, and you've shared with us so much.
I also want to highlight just one other thing, is that if you consider the challenges facing state institutions in holding these agencies accountable in terms of the transformation agenda, you have to recognize that the South African government has been having to toe a very fine line between making sure that we maintain macroeconomic stability in the country, according to our business operations and other frameworks. But at the same time, we have to recognize that this issue of resistance to change, from where we sit, in terms of the negotiated settlement that was concluded in South Africa, and was a precursor to the establishment of the democratic state, that black people have been incredibly magnanimous and forgiving for the wrongs and the injustices of the past. And I think, echoing and listening to the president on the radio this morning, where he talks about the fact that, the divisions in our society now are becoming so clear that you ignore that at your peril. And as I said earlier, if you take our industry as a microcosm of the challenges that the South African state faces across the board in terms of juggling, maintaining its role as an independent democratic state, whilst at the same time trying to advance the developmental requirements of addressing the legacy of apartheid, then it's a really difficult landscape to navigate. But I do believe that the state is serious about doing that, but more can be done and needs to be done to ensure that the carrot approach has not worked in getting businesses to come to the table to assist with the transformation agenda with the urgency that it actually requires. And so a regulatory framework that imposes certain requirements in terms of compliance with those transformation objectives is actually critical at this juncture for two reasons. One, to ensure that we address the growing frustration and anger amongst the majority of our people because of continued exclusion and the harsh, squalid conditions that they have to live under, including the lack of service delivery, which the state is hard-pressed to deliver to the majority of our people, bearing in mind that the infrastructure development of the apartheid state and economy was largely geared towards servicing 5% of the population, i.e. the white minority. Secondly, that the social fabric of our country needs to be stabilized. It's it's unraveling. And we saw that with the unrest in KZN last year, where damage to infrastructure and the loss of lives was significant. So this industry cannot bury its head in the sand. Like other bigger sectors who contribute significant amounts of funding to the fiscus in the form of taxes and other regulatory obligations, it must come to the table and it must be seen to be held accountable to those transformation objectives in no uncertain terms.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. The thing is that, we know, we know the problems, we know the issue, we know the reason why there hasn't been any transformation. The thing is that for the government to regulate tax to go up, to regulate this and that to go up, it can be overnight. Why transformation is going to take so many years? Why is it going to something that has to do with people's lives, that has to do with people's careers?
I'll give you an example as to what they do to the state.
I've heard this conversation since I started in this industry. That was like 2015 or 2014. I don't remember. 2005 or 2006 when I started in the industry. I heard that there were some, procedures on this for transformation and all of that. And then now I'm still here, and I'm still hearing the same thing. But when it comes to things like tax, it's like they sleep tonight, and over the night they decide, okay, we're going to regulate taxes going up. Tomorrow morning, taxes up. Petrol is going up. Petrol is up overnight. But something that has to do with, transformation for good, for something great, for something beautiful, that has to do with, with as I said, this is brutal for us as Black people, filmmakers. You know what I mean? Why is it going to take so much? Because they're the government. They can make these decisions. No one can hold them hostage for them to make these decisions.
I have to disagree with you.
Yeah.
It's not that they are being held hostage, and I'll tell you why.
No. I believe that's why I'm saying that they don't have to be held hostage, even though they are. That's why the reason I'm saying that they don't have to be held hostage is because I know that they've been held hostage.
Okay.
They are the government.
Yeah.
They can't be held hostage for such things, for such transformation. You know what I mean?
The state has not just the moral responsibility, it has the constitutional authority to enact any and all legislation that ensure that the constitutional rights to freedom of economic activity, for example, is implemented in practical terms. The state and business will argue that there's a limitation on the provision of those rights, for example, that it has to be considered within the context of the available resources and capability of the state at any given point in time. The reality is that there are massive amounts of funding sitting all over the place. In the National Skills Fund, I think, even after the allocation of the 1 billion to the free tertiary education that was enacted under President Zuma's administration, I think there's still a few billion sitting in that fund. But the bureaucracy around accessing that funding to drive the development of skills development is so onerous that at the same time businesses simply, especially smaller businesses, don't have the capacity, and larger businesses don't have the will to actually engage with those agencies. And so you have these surpluses sitting in different funds that are not being utilized. And in that ways, the state has to assume a measure of responsibility for why those resources are not being allocated to drive skills development, to drive the development of small businesses, etc., etc. So, if you consider, for example, that there are all these funds available, the state has a responsibility to ensure that access to those funds for businesses who are wanting to drive skills development, enterprise development, is made easier. We have one of the most significant regulatory burdens when it comes to the establishment of businesses in South Africa. To register a company here can take up to 2 months. In other countries, it takes a week.
Yeah.
And then you have any one of a number of regulatory requirements that you as a small business have to comply with, and that places an additional burden on those businesses, but it also poses an additional challenges, particularly for startups, and smaller businesses. And that brings me to the other question: is the access to finance and markets and networks for smaller production companies, which is an issue I'll be speaking to at Broadcasting Media Conference that's being hosted next week here in Cape Town. You cannot expect a small business that is wanting to establish itself in the marketplace to meet the requirements of commercial lending criteria that the commercial banks impose, i.e.
Exactly.
the provision of collateral or equity or the demonstration of existing contracts that have commercial value and can demonstrate projected revenue flow over a 2 or 3 year period. Now, those are the requirements from agencies like the Industrial Development Corporation, the Small Enterprise Financing Agency, the National Empowerment Fund, which means that by and large, the only people and businesses that can apply to those agencies for support and investment are established businesses with the capacity to retain specialized services, both legal and accounting and financial, to do those financial forecasts and to also secure the necessary contracts.
Yes.
Now, in that particular context, we now have an additional barrier of entry that's compounded by the fact that there is resistance by the established industry to actually opening up the market. And in this regard, I want to highlight the fact that we have any one of a number of small business development agencies. The previous Minister of Small Business Development 2 years ago lamented the fact that the budget that was allocated to her department was about, I think, 3 or 5 billion rand short of what they actually needed to drive and to meet their mandate of supporting the development of small, particularly black-owned businesses. Now, if the state is not allocating the required resources to those departments, then the question that we need to ask is, why is it not doing so? Because it's not as if it cannot find the money. We saw that under COVID, that government was able to find the money to fund the fight against COVID and to protect the citizenry. And we saw what happened with those particular processes. So I think, as you correctly point out, government has the capability. The question we have to ask is, why is that capability not being exercised in the most stringent manner possible to address the developmental needs of our country and different sectors where we know transformation is a massive challenge to that particular sector, but also to the country as a whole. And if we don't engage in those debates, if we don't ventilate those issues as ordinary people, then we are also failing in our constitutional responsibility as citizens to actually hold the state accountable. And I think that, the president went to great lengths last year to ensure and to reassure the South African people that the state was committed to advancing broad-based Black economic empowerment and transformation, and that it remained a key pillar of government policy. But by his own admission, acknowledged that we have the most incredible policy in place. The deficit is in implementation of that policy when it comes to reality. And that's where the breakdown happens, and that's where delivery of and realization of that policy becomes a major issue, because you can have all these amazing policy papers like the Creative Industries Master Plan, the Audiovisual White Paper, the SABC Amendment Bill, which, you know, many of which is hotly contested and debated in different forums. But at the end of the day, if you don't empower and capacitate the agencies tasked with that mandate to realizing that policy to the benefit of our people, then what is it that we're actually doing?
Yeah, I think let's just leave it there for now. Yeah, because I think we're just also running out of time. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the whole thing now is like, because there are all these, you know, associations and organizations like that are there to represent, you know, the people on the ground, like your IPO, like your Writers Guild, like your IPFC, which I'm also a member, part of IPFC, like your Independent Directors Association, you know. So I think it's just like high time for us guys, you know, to work together, you know, not as individuals. Because what I realized is that all these associations in these organizations, you know, they partly work together. You know, it's almost like you'll find, let's say, Andile is part of. Andile is part of IPFC. Andile is part of maybe member of IPO, and then in that way, because of that, you know, if we can come together as one force, you know what I mean? Come together as one force and come up with something that will enforce these government sectors, you know, and give them no choice for this transformation, because it's been taking so much time.
Okay, the reality is that there is contestation within those very organizations around transformation itself.
That's
the morbid reality. And within those very organizations, there are also existing interests that have been there for a very long time, and that need to protect their business interests. And that's fine. The point is that if you're protecting your business interests at the expense of the greater good of the broader industry, then you need to be called to account on that.
Exactly.
Because if you're advancing a narrow vested interest agenda, because all over the world, globally, you know, industry associations work together in collective interest. Because if you stabilize the value chain across the sector, then there's work for the writers, there's work for the actors, there's work for the small business people, there's work for the independent creative, there's work for the independent production house, and you develop product and content that is of a good enough standard that it can be commercialized, and that it can travel internationally and recoup return on investment.
Sure.
But for as long as we have the status quo where there is resistance to any coordinated effort to acknowledge, first of all, that
that's what I noticed. I noticed that
is in the collective interest, not just in the interest of Black people.
Yes.
And you know, if you look at I think it was the finance minister's statement in one of our presentation on the draft BEE scorecard, we use a quote from one of his presentations in Parliament, where he clearly says that broad-based Black economic empowerment is not just in the interest of Black people. It is in the interest of our collective society and economy.
Yes.
And you have to recognize that black people, white people, and white businesses have a head start on black people when it comes to business and economic activity, second to none, that was pioneered and entrenched in legislation under the apartheid state for 50 years. So we constantly playing catch up, and we constantly at the tail end of, I mean, we cannot even begin to compete as black businesses in that space because, you know, it'll take decades and decades and decades before we build that capacity. And in the meantime, those established businesses are growing their market share
Yeah.
incrementally during the same period of time.
Yes.
So that imbalance, that skewed imbalance that we've inherited historically is something that will take generations to actually address.
Yes, I love that. I love your. This conversation. I really, say it was one of my best conversations I've heard. Because I mean, it's what we stand for as this podcast. This podcast is all about that. Obviously, yeah, we do wanna give out the educational content, but the whole point of it is it's about transformation, equality, and change. You know, it's not even about color. It's not even about black and white. It's about equality. You know, it's about equality, because at the moment there's nothing equal in the film industry. I mean, specifically in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, there's nothing equal. There's nothing equal. Otherwise, if there was anything equal, no one would be running to Joburg. You know, no one would be just going in the film industry just to get a pay so that I can provide for my, you know what I mean? Some of the people, they came because of they love doing this. They end up saying, I want to be a director, I want to be there, I want to be there. As time goes by, they realize that their dreams are impossible because of the inequality in Cape Town.
Yeah.
They realize that these dreams are impossible. I will just do this so that I can provide for my family. We don't need that. You know what I mean? That has to change. So, Independent Directors Association Africa, you know, we've opened up ourselves to work with any association or organization out there that wants to work with us. You know, we've started sending up emails. We started the conversation with government. With government sectors. We started. Also sending emails. Also, conversation with Parliament as well. You know, yes, Parliament as well. Conversations with Parliament as well. Conversations with Director of Arts and Culture. You know, we're about to start a conversation now with National Video Foundation. You know, so we are opening up ourselves. You know, to any association or any organization that wants to work with us, join hands with us, you know, to see this thing possible. Any last words, Quinton, before we wrap up?
Yeah, look, first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Yeah.
There are not enough platforms where this kind of conversation is being accommodated.
Yeah.
There are not enough people engaged in this conversation. I think there's been a deliberate attempt to close down the spaces for this kind of conversation to happen, particularly here in the Western Cape. And I think that's a major issue. I'm very heartened to hear that you are engaged as an organization in conversation with key agencies whose brief and mandate it is to actually address and deal directly with these issues. And that's really important because the more people that are engaged in that process, the more these issues are ventilated and the more they cannot be ignored.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's been ignored for too long. It's
Yes.
been brushed under the carpet, and that carpet needs to be swept
Yeah.
and taken out,
Be cleaned.
and that dirt be cleaned.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're dealing with. And for me, as an independent filmmaker, you know, I would love to just be doing and developing the stories that I want to develop. But I do believe also as a political activist in the anti-apartheid struggle during the 80s that my responsibility and obligation as a citizen goes way beyond that
Yes.
in terms of addressing those historical imbalances and ensuring that the constitutional provisions that people died for to make a reality in South Africa are actually realized. You know, if not in my lifetime, then certainly in your children and their grandchildren's lifetime. Because at the rate that things are going at the moment, you know, I very much doubt that we'll see that kind of fundamental change in my lifetime. Maybe in yours, because I'm assuming you're
Yeah.
much younger than me, you know, so you have the
Yes.
benefit of time. I certainly doubt very much that fundamental change in this country will not be effective without a radical shake-up of all kinds of regulatory and policy processes, but also institutional frameworks and operations that effectively, despite the state's intentions of trying to drive the development and the empowerment of black people, has simply not been realized, you know. And I don't know how long and how much longer people will be patient with that situation. And that for me is a bigger cause for concern and goes way beyond the narrow paradigm of people trying to frustrate transformation in this particular sector and other sectors of the economy.
Thank you so much, Quinton. Really appreciate your time, sir. You being here truly helped. I believe that everyone that will be listening and watching, whether you listening via Apple Podcast or Spotify or Amazon or whatever, or watching on YouTube, I'm definitely sure that this is really informative, especially if you are that that young black, fighting for transformation as well. Trying to to join us in this fight. The thing that I'm asking, someone just as we're closing, Quinton, someone said to me, Andile, you hardly find funding for what you're doing, especially if it's based on black people. It's based off of wanting to help black people, transformation of black and all of that in the film industry in the Western Cape. So I'm urging, to all government sectors and because we want to make this association a safe place for black people to want to be part of it. Because at the moment, all our brothers and sisters are afraid to be part of what we are starting, simply because of their stomach, simply because of their bosses. If it's maybe it's a focus puller, the DOP is white, or the director, the DOP that they usually work with is white. They will no longer get work. So we want to get into a place where we make this Independent Directors Association Africa a safe place where every single black man and even white people who are all about transformation, who see what we see, because they are the white people out there, like David Max Brown. They believe that there's no transformation in Cape Town when it comes to film industry. You know what I mean? So we want to make this, so we can't do it alone. We need hands, we need help, with decision makers, in the country, like your IPO, organizations that have been there for a while, join hands together, try and convince our brothers and sisters that this is the right thing that we are doing. It's for the right cause. It's and it's going to be a safe place for everyone. That's what we're trying to do. So guys, that was our episode for this week. Thank you so much to Quinton for coming through. We appreciate you, sir. And we honor you for your presence and for everything that you've been trying to do for the industry and continuing doing for the industry.
Thank you. And I honor you in the same way
Yeah.
for the work that you're doing. And I think it's to be commended.
Yeah.
And you raise a very important point that about creating a safe space for black people.
Yeah.
because as Black people, we are under attack,
Yes.
and particularly in terms of progressive positions that is being advanced by key people. As I said earlier, we are few and far between, and we really need to be supporting each other along with those progressive white voices that recognize the urgency of the situation and that also simply understand that at the end of the day, this is beyond color.
It's beyond color. It's not about color.
It's not about color. It's in the collective.
That's what I've been
human
trying
interest.
to make people understand. This is not about color. I've been saying this, Quinton, that my mentors were white.
Yeah,
So how can I make this about color?
exactly.
If all my mentors were white, from since I was a PA to when I was in production,
Yeah.
to when I was in AD, to when I was in camera department, even to now as directing.
Yeah.
Like now as a director, people like when I started in director, Bruce McDonald is white. He was my mentor. So I can never make this about color.
Yeah.
Never.
It can't be because color is a ridiculous concept in the first instance.
Exactly.
And it's been proven scientifically. And in fact, one of the projects that I'm working on has as its founding premise a objective to disprove the whole issue of racial superiority or difference
Yes.
has been advanced under the apartheid state. It's the most absurd, ludicrous concept that has plagued us as human beings across different countries globally for so many years, including under the remit of slavery, that technically as human beings we need to recognize the universality of our human identity and existence. And that's key. And that's ultimately what we need to be striving for. And all of these issues that we're dealing with around transformation, resistance to change, monopolization of sectors of the economy, are simply obstacles to be overcome in a much longer and more profound journey
Yes.
to actually celebrating the human experience and recognizing, the unique nature and identity of each of us as special in the most significant way.
Yes.
Because, to quote, in my other life, I'm also a traditional healer, a sangoma,
Yes. Okay.
and have been
Yes, I
for
see.
the last 22 years. And so, it's been a long journey within myself to recognize that the entire premise of the apartheid state and their policy of separate development was really to divide us as human beings, And as long as they could divide us as people, whether black, white, colored, Indian, pink, blue, green, that small minority of control freaks, could dictate the agenda and reap the benefits of an establishment and a government that they'd set up essentially to advance their own narrow interests.
Exactly.
And so, one of the stories I'm dealing with at the moment is a collaboration on profiling the plight of poor white Afrikaner families in the post-democratic state. Because again, there's the issue of exclusion on the basis of class and social status.
Yeah.
So we also need to recognize that this is a much bigger issue that we're dealing with here, and it's a complex terrain that needs to be navigated, but at the same time, it's profound in its simplicity. That if I honor you as a human being worthy of dignity and respect and the realization of your hopes and aspirations, then I honor myself in that process.
Exactly.
And so, you achieving and realizing your potential serves me in realizing my own potential. And in that way, the synergistic relationship between us as human beings is clearly established and acknowledged. And what more could we want in a country that has come out of such a fractured and violent past?
those were the last words of today's episode from our legend, Quinton. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
Don't know about the legend.
Cheers, guys. See you on the next one. Thank you.